Hello. So as the slide says, Norm Barber, Principal Program Manager, and a little background on me. I've been at Microsoft now going on 7 years. Prior to that, I was a partner at Arthur Andersen, and I ran the security and privacy practice for the firm. And so it's kind of interesting to sit in this conference room because this kind of reminds me of the now defunct partner conference room at 1345 Avenue of the Americas. But anyway, that's another, and that was a period of time when I learned a whole lot about data leakage protection in the Andersen demise. Boy, do I wish we had RMS. But anyway, a couple of other things on this I want to point out. I manage a program within a group called Directory Access and Information Protection, which is the engineering team that develops all of our forefront solutions and certain solutions delivered through the Windows platform. And my responsibility is to manage all of our global connections with customers. So we have engineering teams that meet with customers on programs like customer-focused design, where we sit down and say, here are some features, which ones are most important to you. We go through design validation programs, and we have programs that Kai's familiar with, the technology adoption program, rapid deployment program, which are, as we get towards release, heightened efforts of testing. So I manage our global customer connection. That's about 100 customers we call the Global 100. So I'm generally, even though I live in New York, I'm generally someplace else. So I'm glad that we could sync up in time. So that's what the Customer and Partner Engineering Group does. You see Microsoft Online Services. You may have heard the comment from Steve Ballmer, this probably goes back to February, when he was speaking at the University of Washington, and one of the students said, so what's the deal here? You and Google, or, you know, where are you on online services? And his response has now become kind of a mantra within Microsoft: we're all in. And what he meant by that is we are going to put significant resources and effort, like the effort that went into our presence on the internet, into online services. And as an example of that, you see Microsoft Online Services. On July 1st, we took our entire engineering team, which was developing directory services, our access control capabilities, and our information protection technologies like RMS, and moved that into the online services engineering group. And you'll see why as we go through this presentation. But it's in direct response to our customers saying, we need to be cloud ready, and we need to be cloud ready now. And so a lot of what I'm going to be talking to you about is the engineering thinking that's going into the next generation of our products. I'll spend some time talking about current capabilities. I want to mostly go through some of the validation we're getting from customers in the way we're looking at information protection, which is why we say beyond DLP. And I'd like to get your comments about that thinking. What I won't do, and you'll see a slide that amplifies that, is go through what those next generation of products might look like. We are down the road on design, but since this is not an NDA discussion, I've pulled all the NDA material out of this presentation. Now, for those of you who are Microsoft customers and do need that kind of information, I would suggest you contact your account teams, and through the right kind of NDA agreements, they can provide you some of that thinking at the roadmap level. But this is not a roadmap conversation, so just some proviso there. So that's kind of background on me, the engineering group, and our movement to the cloud. So as we sat down with customers, talking about information protection, we said, so what are the key business scenarios you're dealing with? What's kind of keeping you awake at night around information protection? And as Kai has gone through, there are plenty of horror stories that have made the front page of the New York Times or Wall Street Journal. And you know, the names, TJ Maxx, DuPont, they've all kind of been poster children for bad things happening to data. But there's a lot that's going on that customers don't always report. And they'll tell us, well, yeah, this kind of happened. And so we get some really interesting insight into that. So I want to go through these a little bit here and then get your validation of whether we've kind of captured the universe. So the first one here, and I apologize for this, is a bit of an eye chart because these are sort of engineering documents. So, road warriors with a personal or corporate issued laptop. Now, again, Kai was nice enough to give us a plug on Windows 7. But the fact of the matter is, you know, we're going to extend support for XP probably past my retirement and maybe my lifetime, I don't know. But, you know, we have, the reality is we have a large number of corporate accounts that have said, we are pretty well in the XP world, whether we like it or not. Because we've got applications that assume a certain set of design principles, certain set of criteria, and for us to move to Win 7, that's going to require some fairly significant some changes. So, you know, the tail on Windows deployment for some companies may be long. So one of the things that we know we have to deal with is whether those are personal computers that are running all kinds of different things, or corporate issued laptops, which may be older generation. From an IPC perspective, we're going to have to deal with that. So that's number one. Number two, handheld devices. We have a customer, actually it's one of the big four, but I won't say who, that started down a path that they would only deploy Windows mobile devices, period, end of discussion. They now have BlackBerries, iPhones. I mean, they just have not been able to keep that barrier as rigid as they'd hoped. So we recognize when we're dealing with use case scenarios, handheld devices, whether those are iPads like Bill's got, or iPhones, or BlackBerries, or whatever the device is, that's a scenario that we have to think about. So handheld devices is a part of that. We've got people wanting remote access. We certainly have lots of, you've got the road warriors who are traveling from place to place, but then you've got people working at home. We just had a series of customer meetings in New Orleans. And one of the government agencies down there, again, I won't say who it was, said, boy, was Katrina a wake-up call for us. Because they've always lived with the possibility of hurricanes, but they didn't think about what happens when we get to a point where the entire infrastructure, roads, IT, can't get on planes, just collapses. It's sort of the 9/11 scenario. And so you got a lot of people working at home. In this case, they've in fact given people new devices, up here the laptop, but they're giving them SSL VPN access. So there's a wide range of access. So we've got some customers, again, on the Windows 7 world that are using direct access where they're tunneling right into the corporate network, but not everyone can do that. So we know we've got, again, a wide array of corporate VPN access, whether they're using our stack or somebody else's stack to deal with. You've got customers and partners that need access to data that they control. They're the data owners. And so that's a scenario, especially in the medical profession, that, you know, clinical trials would be an example of that. So that's a scenario we have to deal with. We have the traditional, you know, corporate users sitting on an internal network accessing server level data, application level data. Sometimes that's structured data, sometimes that's sitting on a file share, sometimes that's sitting on a SQL database, sometimes it's sitting on SharePoint. So we've got all kinds of ways to get to that data. And then the last area, which is one that I think we're all going to learn something about, is the cloud, right? What's the cloud? So we're looking at this in sort of three layers. There's, infrastructure as a service, that's your classic outsourcing. Platform as a service, which is the Azure model. And we just announced at the Worldwide Partner Conference this week that we're going to have what we call an appliance, where you can create your own private cloud using Azure as a platform. And then there is the honest-to-God, sitting in the cloud, Microsoft Data Center, Azure, and everything in between. And so this notion of a hybrid model, where we've got customers saying, you know what, I want to run my application in the cloud because I want to develop it using new tools. Ultimately, I'd like to bring it back in-house to manage it. But I need to authenticate people through the cloud. But I don't want to bring authentication back in when I bring the application in. Can you do that? That's the kind of model. So, okay, what does directory services look like? How do we protect documents that are flowing in that model? So this is going to be a major focus as we go forward in terms of a business scenario. So those are the 6 major ones that we're looking at. So let me stop here and ask you, do you think we've missed something in terms of the business model? No, I see you in the back.
For your remote machines, are they managed or unmanaged in your scenario?
We sort of have a subcategory of managed and unmanaged. In this one up here, we'd have both. Especially in situations where customers have said, you know what, we're going to give the users money to go buy their own machine, and they'll manage that. They'll worry about patching. They'll go out to Windows Update and take care of that themselves. So it's both.
I am always reluctant to connect to the enterprise network with my home system. The VPN is intended to protect the enterprise network from my system, but I have to penetrate my own firewall outbound in order to connect to their network. Their network has hundreds of thousands of users, and it's generally flat.
Right.
And there's nothing between me and the internet then except their very, very fragile perimeter. Yeah. And so I am reluctant to connect. And I've got a philosophy that really says that a system should always connect the same way. I should not be able to connect my system to the internet and then come inside or connect to the enterprise via a VPN from the internet and then come inside and connect to it directly. I should always connect the same way. So if I ever connect by VPN, I've got to always protect by VPN. But I should be able to protect via a VPN in such a way that I have more than simply the Windows software firewall to protect me from what's happening on the enterprise network.
So, and granted, this is a little more edge discussion than information protection, but it's a good point. So, would you agree that having some way to understand that it's you on this machine, but this time Bill connected from Starbucks. Don't know why he did that this time, but we know this is a public network as opposed to sitting in the corporate office. Therefore, these policies apply, and they're different. Because that's a variation of what you just said. That says I've got a standard way to enforce, but different policies.
I guess I'm really saying that the protection has to work both ways.
Okay.
That the enterprise cannot expect me to accept risk on their behalf in order to reduce the risk to them.
That's interesting.
Right, so the edge is going to have an application running to do a check on your system to make sure it's in compliant with the infrastructure. And if it isn't, you have to fix your computing system to be compliant. That's what's going to happen.
and that's grand. I'm perfectly willing to accommodate that. What I'm not willing to accommodate is that then I become exposed. My system becomes exposed to everything that happens on their flat network on the inside.
Oh, I see.
Right, because you're not supposed to use your computer.
I'll echo both sides of that, by the way. You know, what Bill's saying is when we connect sometimes, and these dual-use machines, if you will, are problematic. I'll give you an example of someone I know who has a fairly tight security policy. They are given a notebook PC by the corporation. It is corporate issued. Nothing is allowed to be put on there except what the corporation determines. And in fact, it's through a VPN to the corporate proxy to anywhere else on the web they want to go. Does that mean that they couldn't go somewhere where something bad can happen? No. And does that mean that there is a risk there when they do go somewhere that something bad could come in, something bad could happen? Yes. But the machines are being used as commodity devices. You need to go somewhere, check on a sale. You're not going to go and say, well, let me just log into my home machine over here, you know, because I'm just getting my coffee right now. You're using the machine in front of you. It's a commodity. So there is the two-way risk there in a sense of, as much as controls have been placed in these environments, there are still leaks that can occur. Now, when they do, the enterprise is at risk from that. But what Bill's echoing, what Bill's saying, and I'm going to echo in a slightly different way, if I bring something in, why should he be exposed to that? And I have had any number of occasions where I've wanted to use a service, and the cloud applications are just wonderful for this. You have to drop shields to accept the service. So it's almost lowering your own policy to accept the application, the service, the facility that you want to take advantage of, whether that's inside the enterprise or outside the enterprise.
Yeah, and I guess part of what I'm saying, Norm, is I want the protection to be specific to the data and not depend upon orderly and well-behaved systems. I work in a department at MPS that's a trusted systems department, right? But I teach management information systems, and what I tell my students is, this is not about trusted systems. This is about living in a world of untrusted systems, which is where most of us have to live.
Yep. And the underlying assumption in all this is that regardless of where you are, you're in a hostile network, and whether it's Starbucks or sitting in a Microsoft, building 121 out in Redmond campus.
Too often the enterprise says, we're safe, you're the risk. And I say, no, no, no. When I'm not connected to anything, I'm safe. When I connect to you, I need to be able to do that in a way that doesn't necessarily expose me any more than you are exposed to me. We both need to have reciprocal protection from one another. And it's not that I don't trust Verizon Business, or I don't trust Deloitte, or I don't trust IBM, or any of those big enterprises that I've worked with. But they're operating their networks as flat with hundreds of thousands of users. And I can't trust a network like that. I don't want to be connected to that without protection any more than I want to be connected to the internet without protection. And they're asking me to break my protection that I would normally have to the outside world simply to accommodate them.
If you're opening your machine to the scrutiny of, is your machine clean, so to speak, as was brought up, that's a big gaping garage door you've opened up to the enterprise, and now you're just saying, okay, I trust you. That's all you're going to look at.
Any other comments? And this is typical of my presentation. If we ever get off this slide, I'd be surprised.
And it's going to be difficult because we're kind of time
bound.
Time
I am
bound
too.
here.
There are a couple I do want to.
Yeah, real quick, to me, I'm an IT person. Cloud and computing to me meant doing your work in the cloud, not necessarily off systems. You know what I mean? Like you just mentioned, you'll be managed through in the cloud through Microsoft's system. So to me, when doing something like that, you have to build a trust, correct? And that does, and that to me is more secure than his scenario he mentioned. Correct? Because there's a standard there that you have to meet to accommodate and be in compliance with the companies, correct?
One more question, and I do want to
Yeah,
make a
we
couple.
gotta, unfortunately, we gotta move, we gotta be out of here.
What are we
by-
looking at time-wise?
I've got about noon, we've gotta get out of here,
Okay,
so
what time is it now? It's about 11:20?
it's 11:25.
Yes, sir.
So how about the idea of defining different types of applications depending on what device you're on? So if I'm on my computer at home that I pretty well trust, I may VPN into the organization and I have access to any machine that I want to. But if I'm coming in at a hotel, I may only use Outlook Web Access because it's a web application. I have very limited, there's only so much destruction that could be done from that interface. So why not define those types of things better, depending on where you're at, and what the level of susceptibility is?
Yeah, actually, if you look at the details of Threat Management Gateway that we just released, it does, it's
Defines that
looking
sort of
at it
thing?
that way, yeah.
And Norm, just so you know, since we're limited on time, we can bring you in, we'll set up a schedule for you. All right, we'll bring you in on a virtual thing, so if people want to keep
Sure.
contributing, we can either do that on a teleconference or a webinar or something like that, and they can keep continuing on that.
Okay.
I don't mean to limit you.
No, it's okay. Just a couple of key points.